Welcome to Motorsport Coaching, the podcast for racers with racers. Miss Motivate can help get you to the next level. Every episode, she talks to the best racers of today and those that can get you there. She'll help you get better
Racing news
at fitness, nutrition, sports psychology, sponsorship, social media, public relations, and media training. Connect with Miss Motivate at motivatetraining.com.au. That's MOTIV8 training.com.au. And now, to help get you to the next level, Miss Motivate herself, Belinda Risley.
Hi, and welcome to the next episode of Motorsport Coaching. My name is Belinda Risley, your host for today. I'm very excited to welcome Mr. Justin Holland. Justin is a course coordinator and lecturer in clinical exercise physiology at Queensland University of Technology. His current teaching areas are musculoskeletal and neurological rehabilitation, as well as exercise and programming. The reason I've got Justin on the show today is that he did a wonderful, or I should say interesting, white paper around hydration in motorsport, specifically in the V8s. So let's listen to how that paper came about and the outcomes. Welcome to the show, Justin.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
So tell us a little bit more about you and what do you do currently at QUT?
So I'm a lecturer and course coordinator here at QUT in Queensland. Lecturing predominantly in musculoskeletal and neurological rehabilitation, as well as strength and conditioning and exercise programming a little bit. Part of that role is working a lot with different clinical populations, from predominantly Parkinson's, osteoarthritis, back pain, and cardiac conditions. But then also research side is more predominantly into the motorsport pathway and driver development and predominantly thermoregulation and hydration as well.
Fantastic, and that's why we've got you on the show for today.
Mm-hmm.
To hear more about your study. So you've completed a PhD around the role of hydration in motorsports performance.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us all about that. When did it start and how long, when did you start? Like what kind of categories did you follow? And what the findings were?
Yeah, so the thesis itself, a lot of it predominantly is based in Australia. So we tried to keep it isolated a little bit to Australian motorsport, just one because of access and feasibility was one. So we aimed high. We went for V8 supercars drivers for a lot of our field-based work, and that in itself has its challenges. Working with elite athletes, but what we always sort of did is we did a first study looking at the characteristics of drivers. So what the strength levels are, what their neck strength is, their cardiorespiratory fitness and flexibility levels are. Because no one's really defined yet, in comparison to traditional based athletes, what motorsport athletes possess in terms of fitness levels. And particularly looking across the three domains of fitness of strength, cardiorespiratory and flexibility.
Yep.
There's some isolated work out there, but never looking at the three predominant domains of fitness. And then we looked at what drivers actually do in the field. So this was looking at V8 supercar drivers, and we were observing their behaviours related to hydration and thermoregulation to see how much they consumed in terms of fluid, how much fluid they lost, what types of fluid they were drinking, and as well as looking at their heart rates and body temperatures as well. And then we did a survey looking at both amateur and professional athletes, and this was across the globe. We did this one to see if there was differences between professional and amateur drivers in terms of their behaviours and attitudes to undertaking hydration-related behaviours. And finally, we replicated everything that we found there in a simulated-based environment. Obviously, we can't put drivers on a track purposely dehydrated, because it's a bit unsafe. But what we tried to do, we tried to replicate what we found in a simulator to see if those behaviours would have an effect on their driving performance and also their reaction times and cognition.
And did it have an effect?
So in terms of performance, we didn't find an effect between average lap time. We did find towards the end of 60 minutes of racing that those that were dehydrated by about 2.7% body mass loss did tend to have a couple more accidents on the simulated circuit. And we also found that physiologically, if a driver is dehydrated, their core temperature, heart rate, sweat rate, and skin temperature is also substantially higher at the end of 60 minutes. One of the interesting findings, though, that we did find is, so we had two groups. One group was hydrated at the start, and one group was dehydrated before they entered the simulator. And despite the group being hydrated at the start, by the end of 60 minutes of racing in 43-degree temperatures, which is similar to what the cabin temperature would be in a V8 supercar, they perceptually felt the same as being dehydrated. So it indicated to us that even if you enter a race hydrated, by the end of it, if you're not consuming fluid during, perceptually you will feel the same as someone who is dehydrated, which obviously then brings into a whole lot of issues around cognitive performance, reaction time, and then also relationships with engineers. If you're feeling perceptually tired and you're not alert, and you're going to lose interest in giving feedback to the engineer, which then may obviously then affect your subsequent performance if you can't provide appropriate feedback. So that was quite an interesting finding, that that even if you're hydrated at the start of a race, it doesn't protect you from entering dehydration levels at the end, perceptually, by the end of it.
Fantastic. You said there were some challenges working with the elite athletes. What were some of those challenges?
So it was a couple of challenges in terms of was trying to get a good sample size.
Yep.
As soon as we sort of enter in with one team, that team becomes obviously protective over their information, and logistically it's quite hard to try and get multiple drivers to participate together.
Yep.
Obviously you can't ask 24 supercar drivers to arrive at 8 o'clock in the morning to provide a urine sample for you. This is probably not logistically possible.
Yep.
So rather what we did is we've narrowed it down, and we've got 3 fantastic drivers to work beside us. And we basically followed them across three different races,
Yep.
race weekends. So we looked at Gold Coast was a bit of a pilot for us, which was an endurance session. Then we did Adelaide, Sydney, and Phillip Island. So we got a nice balance between Phillip Island, which is obviously very cold,
Yep.
to Sydney in Olympic Park, which is a street circuit, so there's a lot more heat absorption around the track, and Adelaide as well, given it's the first race in February, March. It means that it's still quite warm there. So we got to see a nice spectrum of the drivers. But importantly, I think when working with the elite side to it, is respecting the driver's time, particularly from a research perspective, is respecting their preparation as well. Obviously, if you're entering as a strength and conditioning coach or an athletic trainer, you try and do everything that you can to make sure that athlete is performing highly. So from a research side, we had to sort of allow that to flow, and obviously respect the time of the drivers, which does obviously hinder some of the data collection, but that's the logistical side of working with elite sport.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So as far as loss of fluid during the 60 minutes, what kind of fluids do you recommend them to take to replenish the lost fluids? Is it water predominantly, or are they taking sport supplementation?
Yeah, so what we did in the simulator, we didn't actually provide any fluid during that. One of the reasons for that is during the races that we observed in the V8s, the drivers actually weren't drinking anything during the races. If they were drinking, it wouldn't be any more than a couple of sips of water. And the predominant reason for that is the water temperature got up to about maximum of about 44 degrees sometimes. So it's unpalatable. It's warm. It's actually heating them. So they didn't see the point in actually consuming any fluid. So that was one of the reasons why we replicated no fluid in the simulator to try and see whether that had an effect. In terms of some other teams, though, I know some other teams do use quite good cooling technology to keep their water cold. And those drivers do tend to drink a little bit more. So for a 60-minute duration, as long as the water is kept at a palatable temperature between about 4 to 10 degrees, water is the best sort of in that time frame. Leaving a race or finishing a race, sports drinks may become handy if there's significant sweat losses and salt losses as well. Anything over 60 minutes, that's when sports drinks may become more viable, as long as they're again maintained at a decent temperature. I was talking with a lot of the teams, they've tried using sports drinks, but because of the temperatures within the car, the sugar in the sports drink starts to actually crystallize on the camelbacks or in their water container, and then it gets blocked. So that's some considerations around that. But depending on the scale of athlete, if it's an amateur or someone who doesn't necessarily have a lot of funding to implement cooling devices for a water container, camelbacks filled with ice water would be substantially enough to make sure that their internal body temperature is appropriate and trying to cool as efficiently as possible. So for anyone who's racing sort of in that 10 to 20 minute duration, which is a lot of the semi-professional drivers, water would be more than applicable, and then using something of a sports drink in nature afterwards would be appropriate as well. But ensuring that they also eat nutritionally well, because there's obviously going to be carbohydrates in the food source. So getting sugar intake from a sports drink, if it's not required, may not be the best option. Because a lot of times what we sometimes see is that people will drive for maybe 10 minutes in a go-kart, for example, but they aren't necessarily losing a lot of sweat, or their energy expenditure isn't quite high. So by having that sugar intake, they're actually going to put more weight on. So by the end of the season, they may end up being 3-4 kilos heavier. And it's actually going to go backwards in terms of their weight balance, in terms of the person to car ratio. So I think it's definitely something to consider, and whether you need it and whether it's appropriate for the demands of your sport.
Fantastic. Thanks for that. I've just got so much information to overload. That's good. So have you always been interested in motorsports? Like, how did you come across getting into this research, and what really drives you to continue with it?
Yeah, so growing up, I always was a big fan of, the annual Bathurst race. We always used to wake up early and watch that on Sundays. But it wasn't really till I was about 16, 17 when I really sort of thought, maybe as a career path of getting into, through the physical fitness side and driver preparation. That was sort of an angle that I thought maybe I could take, because I got more interest in it, particularly around 16, 17 would have been when Mark Webber sort of broke around into Formula One. So that was a big sort of push, obviously, with Australian interest in motorsport there. So that's sort of where it stemmed from. And then once I was doing my undergrad, I proposed it to some of the lecturers, and obviously there's not much research in motorsport. So I thought, well, this could be a unique side and a unique area to get into, with the end goal trying to be getting into Formula One, or in a elite sort of sense of training and physical preparation for drivers.
And is that still the goal?
It's still on the radar, whether that be through research side, working research, or one-on-one with drivers. It's still on the radar. I think there's a lot to do research-wise still with these drivers. is the main challenges around access, funding, resources, whether that be from organisational perspective or from actual drivers' interests themselves.
Yeah. And have you worked with any of the drivers, like one-on-one, even doing like the physical training side of things?
Not so much, not one-on-one. We had the drivers that were in my PhD thesis. I would say we worked with them predominantly for, that probably would have been about a 6-month process working with them, but unfortunately we weren't allowed to actually intervene with them because it would have hindered the study results. It was purely just observation. But I think even just being there and being a presence, some of the drivers ended up losing about 5 kilos over the Christmas period because they saw their data, they saw their information, and they thought, oh, I could drop my body fat down a little bit. So just the presence itself, I think, has a potential impact on drivers.
Fantastic. And have you raced yourself? Is it just an actual passion project that's turned into your life career, or?
Yeah, I wish I could have raced. Unfortunately, I'm sure as everyone sort of appreciates, the cost around motorsport isn't cheap.
Yeah.
And I think I started a little bit too late to sort of get into any go-karting or anything as well. So it's been more of a passion and a side observer, and I thought, I can use my talents in a side angle than being an actual driver. Yeah.
And are you currently doing any research now?
So we've got a couple of project ideas that we want to do. One of those is trying to actually look at the drivers' race suits and to see how much they impact on the sweat rate and sweat loss of a driver. No one's really sort of quantified how much just the apparel itself impacts on a driver's sweating and how much that creates in terms of body temperature, or the effectiveness, particularly for the other professionals that use cool suits, how well those cool suits actually cool the driver.
Yeah.
So that's one angle that we want to look at. Also in the endurance races, so more so like the 24-hour races, but also the 12-hour Bathurst race, looking at sleep and carbon monoxide as well. There's a fairly strongish link between carbon monoxide and sleep quality, but also a lot of these drivers have it starting at racing at 6 o'clock in the morning, which means that they're usually up at probably 3 o'clock, and that's going to disturb their sleep, and then seeing how that impacts their subsequent racing ability if they have to drive in an afternoon stint as well. So looking at like the Le Mans sort of series and the 24-hour challenges, in terms of sleep quality there. There's also another angle that we want to take in determining what actually makes a driver, and not just looking at the physical component. Motorsport's more, it's physical, it's cognitive, it's relationships as well, in terms of your relationship with your engineer, your family, because it is a family-based sport that it's just not how fit you are. There's a whole lot of other side to it that can determine who a winner is. And I mean, you could have the same car, same fitness levels, but if you're mentally prepared and for the day, you're probably going to be the one that's going to win.
And of course, with your nutritional intake as well.
Exactly right, nutrition as well. Yeah.
In a couple of weeks, I have a great interview coming up with an osteopath that we work with, Annabelle Runford, and she's actually wanting to do some research around breast cancer and female drivers and the impact that does a crash have on their breasts, and the suit, again, like the role that the suit plays of protecting them.
Yeah, right. That would be interesting.
I didn't even think of that, so yeah, it was interesting. She's
Yeah.
So
That.
based in Albury.
Okay.
Doing that, and yeah. Cool. So lost my train of thought now. I was thinking of like all those exciting things that you're going to be doing. Oh, and so have you got teams that you can work with at the moment, or are you looking for teams for those studies that could be of interest, or how do you get your participants really?
Yeah, so for PhD participants, there's a lot of cold calling. It was a lot of emails and then using contacts in the industry. So we tried basically every team in V8 Supercars. I can't say which team because otherwise that will break which team we actually worked with and the drivers. But we were able to get a very prominent team on board, and then we got to do some side work with some other teams. So it's a lot of cold calling with it, and then just contacts in the industry to get on board. I think by the end of the time the PhD was finished, it would have been good to have all those contacts before it started. But I guess that's the process of it in getting into the industry and getting those contacts. I think now, in terms of the next phase of recruitment, it needs to come down from like CAMS or FIA sort of direction, because that's obviously where the participants are going to come from. And if there's directive from those organisations, more teams are going to be on board to get that research done. So that's more so the new direction with it, but we're certainly not against if a team was wanting research done to facilitate that. So we're definitely not against that. But I think in terms of when we look at publishing research or getting research out there, they always look at your numbers and they always look at how many participants you have. So that's sort of the direction that we need to take with it. And as soon as you do human-based research, there's always a lot of challenges in recruiting those people. So that's the new direction I think we're going to take in going more with the FIA and with CAMS and the Global Motorsport Safety Institute in Switzerland as well.
Oh, cool.
Is where the new direction hopefully will take.
Oh, that's very exciting. Have you got any dates, or is that like a 2019 project?
So it's probably going to be a 2019. Where at the moment I'm talking with a student in Italy who wants to come over and do a PhD. So if he gets accepted here, that will build on that. But we're definitely looking towards 2019 to start some more of that research. And even trying to partner with, coming back to your previous question, just about partnership with industry in terms of, if we do the race suit sort of project, we'd be looking at like Sparco or Alpine and things like that, RPM Raceway, to try and get them on board to facilitate different race suits and designs and the most expensive versus least expensive in terms of thermoregulation. So 2019 is going to be the year, hopefully, if we get our PhD student on board. To undertake some of that research.
2019 will be here sooner than we know.
That is exactly right. Yep.
We're already planning for the next year already. It's like,
it's crazy.
I know. And so just finishing up, what are some tips you can give our listeners around about hydration during the motorsport race? I mean, you spoke about the shorter races. That water was fine, and the longer races generally over 60 minutes to have water. Is there any other tips? Is it like about, as you said, like coming through their foods, through the hydration? And what about things about dealing with going to the toilet requirements?
So I think three key points would be: keep it simple. Don't overcomplicate it, but be aware of it. Acknowledge that it's important for race preparation. But it's 1% of your preparation, but every 1% does add up to the end goal. So simple tips that I'd recommend: be aware of how much you're drinking during the day. So that could be as simple as, if you're using bottled water, stack up your bottles in terms of, so that way you know how much you've consumed, which is what we actually did with our drivers. As soon as they finished the bottle, we got them to put it there, and then we could add up how many meals they'd actually consumed throughout the day. Other ones is look at urine colour. Should be straw-based colour, or very, very pale yellow colour. If it's darker than that, you need more fluid. If it's lighter, you're in a safe range, but I'd never recommend to anyone to overhydrate or go past their limits or what they need. So pre-hydrating or drinking over what you expect for a race is not going to offer any benefit. So just sometimes the new recommendation now of what they're going to is maybe to thirst, but it's pre-planned thirst, or drinking within what you know you're going to need, and also drinking at the most opportune point. So I guess the easiest way to think about it is if you look at Monaco from a couple of weekends ago when Dan won, getting a drink there would be very hard because you got to do so many gear changes and brake applications and driving and changes on the steering wheel. Like actually getting a drink is probably very hard to do. But if there's a safety car period, there's long straights, that's probably the most opportune point to actually consume fluid. So it's very hard to put a pre-planned structure in place saying you need to drink this many mils per minute. It's more about what is the most opportune point to drink fluid. And it's the same for cyclists even. They're not going to be able to drink if they're going around weavy bends, but at food stations and food stops, they can grab food intake there. The other one is in terms of the fluid that you actually consume. Water is always the best rehydrating fluid. Sports drinks over that 60 minutes are a good intake. Tea, coffee also do hydrate. Coffee, some people have the idea that it's actually a diuretic. Only when you get up to about 5 cups of coffee will it actually start to make you need to go to the bathroom. But depends.
I've heard all day, Justin.
Yeah, have 5 cups and you'll be right. But it does depend on your habitual coffee intake though. If you haven't consumed coffee before, you're not a regular coffee drinker, it will have a different effect on you compared to someone who drinks it every day.
And that's a whole new podcast in itself, isn't it?
It is.
Coffee and performance, or coffee tea.
That's right. So they do have a rehydrating element to them. So by all means, milk as well is very good at hydrating, and particularly after a race. If you have a chocolate milk or just plain milk, it actually can help retain fluid better because of the protein content in it compared to a Gatorade, which if you consume a Gatorade quite quickly, you'll actually pass it through at a quicker rate compared to, say, a milk-based beverage where you may only have 300 mils of it because the protein helps store the water a little bit better. So some teams now, even in the rugby league, are actually giving their players chocolate milk after they finish because of the protein-based content and the ability for it to retain water and rehydrate better. In terms of during a race, for the tip number 3, I think if it's beneficial for you and you know that it's going to be a long race, then look at drinking fluid during. If it's a 10-minute, 15-minute race, you can probably warrant yourself in not having to worry about fluid during. And the cost benefit of implementing a cooling device for your car is probably not going to be needed. It's probably financially, the benefit is going to go towards parts or spares or something like that. So for those professional drivers though, who have maybe a little bit more financial resources, cooling fluid during a race is definitely warranted to make it palatable to drink, to maintain that cognitive ability and that perceptual response. Was that everything in the question? Yeah.
Here's my question. What about our friends at Red Bull? Do they get a run? Monster Energy. I know some of the guys are sponsored by Monster Energy drinks as well. Energy drinks, like those type of energy drinks, have a play, or is it really just good to go with vodka?
When we actually asked in the survey between the professionals and amateurs about who was drinking what and the percentage of people that were actually consuming fluid during, or the beverage type, energy drinks were the third most rated behind water was first, then Powerade, Gatorade, and then energy drinks. There still wasn't a high percentage. I mean, water was consumed by 95% and energy drinks for about 15%. So that was at least a positive in what we saw there. I think just be wary in terms of those energy drinks with the sugar content. If you're having it because it's got the caffeine in it, then perhaps go for a more caffeinated beverage like a coffee or a tea, because the sugar is probably not needed if you're having a meal alongside it as well. And it comes down to the demands of your race as well. Mm-hmm. If it's a 10, 15-minute race, that sugar, that energy is probably not going to be warranted through an energy drink. So I wouldn't be saying that energy drink is going to get you the extra 10, 15% that you need to win compared to your next competitor. It's most likely other areas that you would be better investing time and energy into than into that sports drink, because that sports drink or the energy drink won't necessarily get you across the line. And it also depends on how much caffeine are in those energy drinks. Yep. They need to have about 3 milligrams per kilogram of body mass to have any effect on performance, and usually consumed about half an hour before an event as well. Mm-hmm. And that's assuming that you then don't have to go to the bathroom during the race as well.
That's what I'm worried about.
Yeah.
And I think just on the final question, Justin, is there really any difference between all the different types of bottles of water available, or versus like bottle versus tap water? That big question.
Yeah, good question.
I've obviously got my Mount Franklin, but there's Coolridge, there's flavored water these days. Yeah. Everything under the sun.
I actually reviewed a paper a couple of weeks ago on deep Hawaiian from the Kona water. Yeah. So it's the water's gathered from 1,300 meters below sea level, and they were comparing it against other beverage types, but it doesn't work. I think the water itself, no.
Easy answer.
Yeah, there's if there's additives to the water, for example, if you add hydrolyte or you add a salt-based rehydrate to your water, then yes, there is potential. But if we're just comparing, say, Coolridge to Mount Franklin to the spring water types, to tap water, there's very little difference between them in terms of rehydrating properties. Sure, they might taste a bit better, and if you like that taste better, then by all means go for the one that tastes better, because that's the one you're going to drink more of. Flavored water, maybe if they've added a lemon flavoring to it, if you prefer that, then yes, drink that if you like it, but it's not going to necessarily change your ability to hydrate compared to just your standard tap water. Yeah.
Oh, fantastic. Oh, thank you so much, Justin. I can hear that there's so many different avenues people go down: coffee, tea, energy drinks, flavored waters, to continue this conversation. Mm-hmm. How can people connect with you if they're wanting to know more about your study or be involved with your study? Even maybe someone from CAMS is listening.
Yeah. So email is a good way. Do you want me to say what the email is?
Oh, I will be in the show notes.
In the show, yeah. So email's one. Twitter is also another good avenue for me that I regularly interact with. So yeah, email or Twitter are probably both the two best ones to get in contact with.
Great. And just before we go, one more thing. Can you recommend any resources, free or paid, that people can learn more either about hydration, or is there like a toolkit or an online app that you can see about your urine, anything like that, or how to capture their water intake or something?
Yeah, there's a couple of free resources online that people can use. The best motorsport specific one Cam's actually did a big project back in, I think it was 2011. That was called Clear to Steer. So that was, they came out with a recommendation guide for drivers there. The FIA also do have a driver manual that does have some recommendations in it. Probably does need a little bit updating in terms of mils of what people should be consuming. But that's also another good resource. Hydration education in the UK is another one that's quite good. And Sports Dietitians Australia is also a good resource. That's an evidence-based resource for people to use. There is others with like Gatorade and Powerade. They do have online sort of how much you should be drinking, what you should be drinking, what their one is. It's not a bad resource, but just be wary they're probably going to push a certain product towards you. But just be wary about whether you actually need to consume that. If you're monitoring your hydration levels through urine, through perceptual feelings of thirst, then you probably don't need to be overthinking it too much. Monitoring is the best tool.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Justin. I've certainly learned a lot about hydration and the effects of water in our performance. We look forward to catching up with you hopefully next year, and we can hear how those new projects are coming along. So again, thank you, and we'll talk to you soon.
Get ready for the race.
Do you feel one step closer to being the next superstar behind the wheel? MotivateTraining.com.au for more. MOTIV, 8, training.com.au.
The green flag.
Every episode gets you one step closer to the checkered flag. The Motorsport Coaching Podcast, getting you to the checkered flag faster.